Imagine boarding a plane, your seat waiting for you in first class. You walk down the aisle carrying nothing but your boarding pass, your calm confidence, and the weight of years spent breaking barriers. But then, a designer bag sprawled across your seat becomes a symbol of something far deeper, a silent refusal to see who you really are. This is the story of Dr. Aaliyah Sinclair, a black CEO who faces more than just a blocked seat. She confronts the invisible walls built by prejudice and entitlement, all while holding the quiet power that comes from resilience and dignity. What happens when the person you dismiss turns out to be the very owner of the plane? What does it take to rise above the whispered doubts, the pointed looks, and the subtle acts of exclusion? And can one calm, unwavering voice really ground an entire airline and spark change? Join us as we unravel a story of strength, injustice, and the power of silent resistance. Hit like, share this story, and subscribe to the channel to dive deep into more powerful stories that reveal truths we all need to hear. The scent of brewed coffee, stale air, and lavender hand sanitizer floated through the cabin like a ritual. Flight 611 to Chicago was boarding on time, gate B-23 flashing green across the monitor. The early boarding group filed in with the usual mix of confidence and entitlement: business jackets, smartwatches, and tote bags that had seen too many airports. Dr. Aaliyah Sinclair stood a few feet back, watching. She had boarded hundreds of flights, more than most pilots, more than most executives, more than most people. But this morning felt different, not because of the flight itself, but because of what she was carrying: a navy blue carry-on, a book she had already read twice, and a boarding pass, seat 2A, first class. What the others didn't see was her weariness, not from the flight, but from the world she had to navigate to even reach this jet bridge. She stepped forward. Click, click, click. Her black leather loafers whispered against the rubber mats. No assistant, no badge, no entourage, just her. And as always, the silence around her said enough. People noticed her. Of course they did. She was striking tall, dark-skinned, graceful in a fitted blazer and pearl earrings, but they never really saw her. They saw a silhouette, a presence they couldn't place. Someone impressive, maybe, but someone else. The flight attendant at the door smiled without recognition. "Welcome aboard." Aaliyah nodded warmly. "Morning." She turned left into first class. Only 6 seats. Polished wood paneling. Leather as soft as memory. A man was already seated in 1C, tapping on a tablet. He looked up briefly, then away. No smile. And there she was. Seat 2A. Blocked. A large cream-colored designer tote bag sat sprawled across the seat cushion, like a queen on a throne. Its gold hardware gleamed under the cabin lights. Next to it sat a woman in oversized sunglasses, scrolling on her phone with one perfectly manicured hand. Aaliyah paused. She had learned years ago not to assume the worst. Maybe the woman was planning to move the bag. Maybe she hadn't noticed her. So she cleared her throat gently. The woman didn't look up. Aaliyah took one more step forward, her voice even and soft. "Excuse me? That's my seat." The woman glanced sideways, then removed her sunglasses, not with urgency, but with a sigh. Her eyes scanned Aaliyah from head to toe, calculating. Then she smiled, a tight, hollow smile. "Are you sure? Sweetheart, you might be looking for Coach. That's back that way." She nodded her head vaguely toward the rear of the plane. Aaliyah blinked. She had heard it all before. The sweet tone masking the blade underneath. The pet names to soften a condescending blow. But what cut deepest wasn't the words. It was how casually they were delivered. She smiled politely, refusing to flinch. "No, I'm in 2A." The woman tilted her head, as if trying to understand some strange dialect. Then came the smirk. "That's cute. You're probably on standby or something." "You sure you're in the right boarding group?" Aaliyah exhaled quietly. Not out of frustration, out of calculation. Every decision she made in public, every word, every gesture had consequences she didn't ask for. She didn't have the luxury of emotion, especially not here. She reached into her coat pocket and held out her boarding pass. It was printed crisp and clear. Rebecca Langford, the woman in 2B, leaned forward finally and peered at it. "Wow, you're serious." "I am. But still." Rebecca didn't move the bag. At that moment, Aaliyah heard heels clicking behind her. A young flight attendant stepped up. She had wide eyes and a clipboard tucked to her chest like armor. "Is there a problem?" she asked. Before Aaliyah could respond, Rebecca jumped in. "Yes, she's confused. Or trying to upgrade herself. Not sure which." Aaliyah turned slightly, maintaining her calm. The attendant, Isla Brooks, looked between the two women and reached for the boarding pass. Aaliyah handed it to her silently. Isla's eyes scanned the name. She hesitated. Then, instead of apologizing, she clicked her mic. "I might need a manifest check up front. Seat conflict in 2A." Aaliyah turned to look out the window. It was always like this. A quiet math of doubt, multiplied by skin tone, divided by dignity. Seconds passed, more clicking, more whispers. She felt it. The weight of nearby glances. People listening without listening. The polite tension of a society trained to watch discomfort, but never intervene. She closed her eyes, only for a moment, and when she opened them again, she reached slowly, deliberately into the inside pocket of her blazer. She pulled out her phone, pressed one number, held it to her ear. "Hi, this is Aaliyah. Go ahead and initiate the grounding protocol for Flight 611. Immediate pause, full audit." She ended the call before Isla or Rebecca could speak. Silence dropped over the cabin like a curtain, and for the first time since she stepped onto the plane, Aaliyah smiled, not out of triumph, but out of clarity, because sometimes the only way to rise is to first bring everything to a stop. The cabin was frozen in that strange kind of silence that follows something no one wants to acknowledge. Passengers pretended to scroll their phones. Others stared out the window, pretending not to hear what they had clearly witnessed. Isla Brooks still held the boarding pass in her hand, her face pale and unreadable. Rebecca Langford leaned back in her seat and crossed her legs, one polished heel tapping lightly against the floor. Her designer tote still sat in 2A like it belonged there, smug and unbothered. "I really don't think grounding the plane is necessary," Rebecca said coolly. "I mean, she could have just said she needed help. Not everyone understands airline seating. No big deal." The arrogance in her voice didn't crack. If anything, it deepened. Isla turned toward Aaliyah, but said nothing. Her lips pressed together in a polite line. That look, the one that says, "I'm sorry this is happening," without actually doing anything to stop it. Aaliyah remained still. She had learned long ago that stillness had power. In courtrooms, in boardrooms, in rooms full of people who didn't expect her to be the one in charge. She wasn't angry. Not yet. Just tired. Tired of having to prove things she had already earned. Seat 2A wasn't a privilege. It was a fact. But in the mind of the woman beside her, facts were fragile, easily replaced by assumption. She took a slow breath and studied Rebecca. The outfit, the attitude, The performance of innocence. Rebecca wasn't new to this game. She had played it before, with store clerks, with hotel staff, with anyone she could treat like they were just lucky to be here. But not today. Aaliyah's phone vibrated once in her hand. She glanced down. Clara Esteban. She didn't answer. Not yet. Another crew member arrived. Male. Late 50s. Crew badge pinned with military precision. "Is there a situation up here?" he asked. Voice firm. Isla straightened up like a student in front of a principal. "Seat discrepancy, sir. Passenger Sinclair has a confirmed two-way boarding pass, but seat was occupied." He took the pass from Yila, examined it, then turned to Aaliyah. "Do you have ID?" The question was delivered without hostility, but also without thought. Rebecca smirked. Aaliyah looked at him squarely. Her voice was clear. "I do. Do you ask for identification from every first-class passenger holding a valid ticket?" He blinked. "Ma'am, this is just protocol." "No, it's not." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Her tone cut through the air sharper than any shout ever could. "I didn't sneak onto this aircraft. I didn't counterfeit a boarding pass. I paid. I checked in. I boarded." She looked directly at Hila, then at the new attendant. "And now I'm being treated like I've done something wrong, simply for asking to sit in the seat I was assigned." The cabin held its breath. Rebecca sighed dramatically and leaned toward the new crew member. "She made a phone call earlier, threatened to ground the flight. I think she might be trying to cause a disruption. It was subtle. Just enough doubt. Just enough poison." The older attendant straightened up. "I'm going to check with the captain," he said quickly, turning away. Aaliyah stood still, eyes locked on the empty seat. She didn't look at Rebecca. She didn't need to. What she felt in that moment wasn't rage. It was weight. The same heavy ache she felt when she saw security guards follow her at upscale stores. The same look of disbelief on hotel clerks' faces when she checked into suites under her name. The same questions, always dressed up in new clothes. "Are you supposed to be here? Did you earn this? Or did you get lucky?" She didn't speak. Instead, she turned and looked out the window again. Clouds were forming in the distance. She remembered her mother's voice, that soft southern drawl, aged with pain and poetry. "Baby girl, you be still in a storm. Let the wind pass through you. Let him see you standing when it's all done." Her grip on the phone tightened. Still standing. Aaliyah didn't want revenge. She wasn't interested in humiliating anyone. She just wanted the truth to matter more than the assumptions. She just wanted peace, to not be a luxury. Behind her, a passenger murmured something to his daughter. A child peeked between the seats, watching her, eyes wide, curious. No fear, just curiosity, and something else. Hope. Aaliyah offered the smallest smile. The girl ducked her head and whispered something to her father. The moment grounded her more than any protocol ever could. The crackle of the intercom snapped her back. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Due to an unexpected systems audit request from operations, we are pausing final boarding procedures and asking all passengers to remain in their seats. Our ground crew will provide updates shortly." Rebecca let out a dramatic huff. "Oh my God. Seriously. This is insane. She's throwing a tantrum and we're all paying for it." Still, no one responded. The mood had shifted. The silence now had shape, density, meaning. Ala stepped closer to Aaliyah. Her voice was lower, more human. "I didn't know who you were. I didn't mean to escalate things. I didn't want to cause trouble. Aaliyah turned. Her eyes softened, but her voice remained firm. You didn't cause the trouble. You just didn't stop it. And that was the truth. That was always the truth. It wasn't always the loud ones that hurt most. It was the silent ones, the ones who knew better but stood still, the ones who said nothing and called it neutrality. A small group of airport operations staff entered the cabin. Among them, a woman with clipped gray curls and a tailored blue suit. Clara Esteban. She didn't need a microphone to command attention. Her voice was smooth and purposeful. Dr. Sinclair, we're enacting your requested review. Manifest is being verified. Please allow us a few minutes. Her tone toward Aaliyah was not deferential. It was respectful. The difference mattered. Rebecca straightened in her seat, visibly confused. Wait. Did she say doctor? What kind of doctor are you? Aaliyah turned to her. Calm. Grounded. The kind that owns part of this fleet. Rebecca blinked, but Aaliyah had already turned away. Her voice low. She nodded toward Clara. Thank you. Clara nodded, and for the first time, the bag in 2A was lifted. Not by Aaliyah, not by force, but by truth. And the truth had waited long enough. The cabin doors remained open. The flight crew moved in hushed urgency. Overhead bins clicked open and shut as passengers readjusted their bags, unsure if they should be settling in or preparing to disembark. No one made eye contact with Aaliyah. That was always the pattern. Not out of malice, out of discomfort. People didn't want to confront what they had just witnessed, because doing so would mean admitting it had happened, that it was real, that it wasn't just a misunderstanding or a bad moment, but something deeper, older, more systemic. Rebecca Langford, now aware that something was very much out of her control, clutched her bag against her lap. Her sunglasses were tucked away. The smugness that once sat proudly on her face was flickering like a candle in the wind. I didn't mean anything by it, she muttered. The words weren't directed to anyone in particular, maybe not even to herself, just floating there, waiting for someone to catch them and call it enough. Aaliyah didn't respond. She had heard apologies like that her whole life. Not apologies, really. Justifications wrapped in soft tones. She was used to people wanting forgiveness more than they wanted accountability. At the front of the cabin, Clara Esteban quietly spoke with the captain. Their voices too low for anyone to hear, but their expressions said everything. Clara's posture was tight, jaw clenched. She was balancing two forces: public image and private truth. Isla Brooks hovered awkwardly by the galley, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles turned white. She kept glancing toward Aaliyah, then quickly away, as if the weight of what she had done had finally settled. Marvin DuPont returned, holding a digital manifest in one hand and a tablet in the other. His expression was unreadable, but he no longer held the confidence of protocol. He held the weight of exposure. Manifest confirms it, he said, his voice neutral. Passenger Sinclair booked and cleared for 2A, flagged as VIP protocol access. There's no error. He glanced at Aaliyah, briefly, then looked away. Isla stepped forward. I should have verified more carefully. I'm sorry. Clara didn't correct her, didn't comfort her either, because the mistake wasn't just procedural. It was relational. Aaliyah had remained quiet through it all, but her silence was not weakness. It was presence. Presence so firm that it forced others to hear what she hadn't even said. Clara walked over to her. Dr. Sinclair, she said softly, we'll be removing the passenger from 2B for noncompliance. I can seat you privately, or if you'd like. We can deplane and board you on the next private charter. Your call." Aaliyah didn't answer right away. She turned slowly, her eyes resting on Rebecca. This woman, this moment, how many times had something like this happened? Just not on a plane, not with an audience, not with evidence and titles and crew lists. How many black professionals, doctors, executives, and artists had been made to feel like trespassers, not because they did something wrong, but because they didn't look like who people expected in that seat. She looked down the aisle at Marcus Wynn and his daughter. They were watching. The little girl's legs dangled over the edge of her seat, backpack still on, eyes wide, curious, expecting. And Aaliyah thought to herself, what does she learn if I leave? What does she learn if I stay? What does she become if I say nothing? She turned back to Clara. No, I'll stay here. Rebecca looked up in surprise. You want to sit next to me? No, Aaliyah said simply. I want to sit in my seat. Clara nodded once. Understood. She motioned to security who had arrived quietly at the cabin door. One was a woman, the other a broad-shouldered man with a badge and clipboard. Rebecca stood up suddenly, hands fluttering around her chest. This is outrageous. I didn't do anything wrong. She's overreacting. This is just political nonsense. I didn't mean to offend anyone. Her voice grew louder, more desperate. This is going to go viral, isn't it? You're going to ruin my life over a bag. Security didn't touch her, didn't rush her. They simply waited. And that calm, that refusal to escalate, made her panic all the more visible. She gathered her bag, threw her scarf over her shoulder, and muttered beneath her breath as she walked off the plane. Aaliyah sat down in 2A. The leather was still warm from the heat of someone else's entitlement. She adjusted the armrest, straightened her blazer, placed her carry-on beneath the seat in front of her. Everything she should have been able to do 10 minutes earlier. Isla came over with a glass of water. Her hands trembled slightly. I'm really sorry, Dr. Sinclair, she said quietly. Aaliyah looked at her. Then be better next time. Not just for me, for anyone who gets looked at the way I did today. Isla nodded. Aaliyah took the water, sipped, and in that moment, something inside her finally relaxed. Not completely, but just enough to breathe. Across the aisle, Marcus spoke to his daughter. See that woman? Baby. The girl nodded. She didn't yell. She didn't scream. She just stood still. And now everyone knows who really belonged in that seat. The girl leaned into him. She's brave. Aaliyah didn't hear them, but somehow she felt it. She always did. The approval of strangers never mattered, but the understanding of witnesses, that was different. That was sacred. Marvin DuPont stepped forward one last time, his voice softer now. If there's anything we can do to make you more comfortable, please let us know. Aaliyah looked at him and simply said, start by training your crew to see people, not just policies. He nodded slowly. Behind them, the cabin crew completed their checks. The remaining passengers were quiet, unsure of how to restart their small talk after witnessing something that wasn't supposed to happen so publicly. The intercom crackled again. Ladies and gentlemen, we will resume boarding shortly. Please remain seated as we finalize our inspection and crew updates. The tone was professional, but something had changed. A shift. A fracture in routine. The kind of fracture that let light through. Aaliyah leaned back against her seat and looked out the window again. The sky was still waiting, but this time, she was going to rise on her terms. No validation needed, just altitude. The aircraft felt different now, not because anything had physically changed. The seats remained leather-bound and symmetrical. The overhead lights still hummed quietly above. But something beneath the surface had shifted. The mood, the air pressure, the way people moved, and the way they watched her. Dr. Aaliyah Sinclair sat in seat 2A with her legs crossed at the ankle, spine straight, gaze focused out the window as if nothing had happened, as if she had not just been mistaken, dismissed, and nearly displaced for simply existing where someone else did not believe she belonged. But it had happened, and even though the woman was gone, the impact lingered in the cabin like perfume after its wearer has left. Marcus Wynn was still watching her. He sat across the aisle in 2C with his daughter curled beside him. She had finally taken off her backpack and was whispering into her father's ear. He nodded, smiled, then glanced over at Aaliyah. Not the kind of glance meant to intrude, the kind that says thank you, the kind that holds a lesson. Meanwhile, the crew moved quietly. Isla Brooks adjusted her scarf and reviewed her safety checklist for the third time. She was not as smooth as before. Her movements lacked rhythm. She kept glancing toward Marvin DuPont, as if hoping he would explain how they had gotten here. But Marvin was unusually quiet. He stood near the galley, holding the manifest on his tablet like it might bite. His fingers hovered over the screen, but he did not scroll. He simply stared. Aaliyah had noticed this, the way people avoided screens when they already knew what was on them. She heard the whisper of a voice beside her. Dr. Sinclair. It was Clara Esteban. The operations director had returned to the cabin after checking in with ground staff. She stood just behind 2A, lowered her voice, and leaned slightly forward. We've issued an incident tag on the passenger removal. It's logged, along with an internal review order for the crew response. Aaliyah nodded, but said nothing. Clara continued, I know you're not asking for that, but it's happening regardless. This wasn't just a miscommunication, and we know it. Aaliyah looked up at her. Her eyes were calm, but not cold. Clara blinked, then paused. We're beginning to... a beat. 2 seconds. Then Clara handed her the tablet. This is the manifest for transparency. Aaliyah took it gently, her fingers brushing over the edge of the case. The screen displayed a list of names, seat assignments, status markers, frequent flyer levels, dietary preferences, operational notes. Nothing strange, nothing illegal, just data. But what stood out was how the data had been ignored. She scrolled down to 2A, her name, highlighted in blue, Dr. Aaliyah Sinclair status, VIP priority tag, executive clearance access full operational, a flag, clear as day. She handed the tablet back. Clara accepted it with both hands. And in that moment, Aaliyah saw the tiniest flicker of something rare. Shame, not the loud, defensive kind, but the quiet kind. The kind that says, I should have known. Clara looked toward the rest of the crew. Her eyes landed on Isla, then on Marvin. She did not speak, but the message carried. Marvin finally broke his silence. He stepped forward and cleared his throat. Dr. Sinclair, I want to apologize. I did not speak up when I should have. I defaulted to policy without judgment, and I recognize now how that made things worse. Aaliyah looked at him. She saw the struggle there. A man raised on rules, who trusted the checklist more than his own perception. She could tell it wasn't hatred that had blinded him. It was routine. That, in some ways, was more dangerous. She gave a small nod. Thank you. Marvin exhaled slowly, like he had been holding his breath for hours. Isla approached next. "I've never seen a VIP flag like that," she said quietly. "But it wouldn't have mattered. I didn't see you for who you were, not even as a passenger. And that's on me." Aaliyah studied her for a moment. "I'm not asking you to memorize profiles. I'm asking you to slow down long enough to notice what bias feels like. In your gut. The tightening, the defensiveness, the shift in tone. That's your signal." Isla swallowed hard. "I felt it, and I ignored it." Aaliyah's voice was softer now. "Don't next time." Isla nodded, then turned away, both relieved and wrecked. The intercom buzzed again. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. Final boarding is complete. We are awaiting final clearance from ground operations and expect to depart within the next 10 minutes. Outside, a rain cloud hovered in the far distance, not close enough to delay the flight, but present, like a reminder. Aaliyah reached for her journal from the seat pocket. She had started writing again in the last year, not because she wanted to publish, but because her therapist had said something that stuck. Unspoken truth will still live inside you. Might as well give it a room. She opened to a blank page and began writing. Not about the woman, not even about the flight, but about systems, how they build walls without meaning to, how people become gatekeepers by habit, how power often wears a smile and a lanyard. Her pen moved in loops. The words came freely. In the seat behind her, she heard a soft hum, a lullaby. Marcus's daughter was singing to herself, barely audible. Aaliyah smiled. She remembered being that age, drawing planes in her math notebook, making models out of cereal boxes, dreaming of building something that could lift others. It was never about the plane. It was about the sky. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the flight prepared for takeoff. Crew moved more fluidly now, like the story had passed through them and left behind a new kind of discipline. Not stiffness, awareness. Marvin returned to the front. Claire gave him a nod, then disappeared through the forward galley door. As she passed Aaliyah, she said one final thing. "We're scheduling a company-wide review on how we train for implicit bias. You're not the first this has happened to, but you should be the last." Aaliyah nodded once. She closed her journal, and for the first time since she boarded, she allowed herself to relax into the seat. She had not come here looking for a lesson to teach, but sometimes the lesson finds you anyway. The engine started humming, not loud, not sudden, just a soft, low-frequency vibration that signaled things were finally moving. For most passengers, it meant the flight was getting underway. For Dr. Aaliyah Sinclair, it was a cue for something else, a moment to disappear, a moment to drift inward, just long enough to regroup. She leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes. She didn't sleep, not on planes, never really had. But she had mastered the art of stillness. Stillness had become her armor, the quiet confidence people mistook for calm, the silence people called grace, when really it was calculation, survival, energy-saving mode for navigating a world that always asked more of her. In this moment, though, she allowed herself to go back. Not in time, in memory. She was 13 again, sitting in the back of her grandfather's truck, eating peach slices from a jar with a plastic fork. The air was hot. The Georgia summer made everything stick to your skin sweat, dust, the weight of things people did not say out loud. Grandpa Eugene had taken her out to the edge of the county, where trees outnumbered houses and cicadas played like background music. He had not spoken much the whole ride. He rarely did. But that day, he had something to say. "Ali," he said, using the name only he was allowed to shorten. "You're going to grow into a kind of life most folks can't picture yet, and some of them won't like what they see when you get there." She had nodded, unsure what to say. He took another bite of peach. "But you listen to me now. Don't let their noise turn into your silence." She remembered those words like scripture, and how hard they had been to follow, because silence, for her, had never been easy. It had always been loud on the inside, a hum in her chest, a slow burn in her throat. And yet, she had learned to hold it, to live inside it. Today's silence felt different. It was not shame, not fear. It was something closer to surrender, not giving up, but letting go of the pressure to explain, to justify her existence, to educate someone who had already decided not to learn. The plane eased back from the gate. Aaliyah opened her eyes. Across the aisle, Marcus Wynne was flipping through a coloring book with his daughter. They were both quiet now, but present. She noticed how he sat a little taller than before, not in pride, in steadiness. It was the kind of posture that came from seeing dignity defended out loud. The flight attendants moved along the cabin, performing final checks. Isla came forward again, holding the tray with a bottled water and a hot towel. Her hands were steadier this time, her voice gentler. "Would you like anything else before takeoff?" Aaliyah shook her head. "I'm fine, thank you." Isla nodded and hesitated, then added something under her breath. "I meant what I said. I'll be better next time." Aaliyah believed her, not because of the words, because of the pause after them. That breath people take when they are choosing to stop defending themselves. That breath that says, "I've heard you." The intercom chimed again. "Cabin crew, prepare for takeoff." Aaliyah pressed her hand lightly on the armrest as the plane began to move. Her fingers found the smooth leather seam and followed it like a lifeline. She had flown thousands of times, and every time, the ascent felt the same. That moment of tension just before the wheels lifted off the ground. That moment where everything rattled just enough to remind you that flying was not natural, that humans were not built to be in the sky. And yet, here they were, defying everything. As the nose of the aircraft tilted upward, Aaliyah felt her stomach drop for a fraction of a second. Then came the weightless silence of the climb. She let herself breathe into it. Inhale, hold, release. Her eyes wandered to the window. The airport shrank below them. Runways like ribbons. Service trucks like toys. People like dots. She had always found peace in this view. It made everything smaller, including the people who had tried to make her feel small, somewhere mid-climb. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. A message from her executive assistant. "Media alert. Video from this morning appears to be circulating on social. Crew interaction partially visible. No external statement issued yet." She sighed. She had known this might happen. There were eyes everywhere now. Phones, witnesses, posts that became narratives before the truth ever had a chance to land. She typed a quick reply. "Do not issue a press statement. We're not chasing headlines. Focus internal first. Debrief Clara's team. I'll follow up tonight." She set the phone aside. This was not about her image. It was about what people learned from this moment. She looked up to find Marvin standing at the front of the cabin again, eyes scanning rows with quiet discipline. He caught her gaze and gave a brief nod. It was not warm, but it was sincere. The aircraft leveled out at cruising altitude. The sound of seatbelt signs switching off chimed overhead. Passengers began to settle again. Small talk resumed in pockets. Devices turned on. Snack trays rattled. But the front of the plane remained subdued, the kind of subdued that meant people were thinking, not out loud, but deeply. Aaliyah leaned forward to pull out her laptop. She opened a folder titled Equity Initiatives. Inside it were 3 drafts. One was a proposal she had written months ago, but never circulated. A framework for in-flight cultural bias training, not just for safety, but for perception. She reread the first paragraph. It began with a question. What would change if we trained for perception the same way we train for turbulence? She highlighted the line and smiled. Clara would understand now. So would Ikla. Maybe even Marvin. She saved the file under a new name, Ground Truth V2. Her fingers rested on the keys a moment longer before she closed the laptop. The sun was coming through the window now, soft and full. The clouds stretched beneath them like a quilt, and somewhere inside her, the silence began to feel less like a burden, more like a choice, a familiar silence. But this time, she owned it, somewhere around 25,000 feet. The mood in the cabin shifted again, not sharply, not publicly. It happened like a temperature change. Quiet, inevitable, felt more than seen. The hum of the engines kept its steady rhythm, but underneath it, there was a different frequency building, one that came not from the plane, but from the people inside it. Dr. Aaliyah Sinclair felt it first in the flight attendants' movements. They weren't rushing, but they were no longer relaxed. Voices dropped to whispers. Eye contact grew shorter. Cabin service became clipped, minimal. She knew the signs. A leak had sprung. Not in the aircraft, but in the story. She reached for her phone again. A second message had come through, this time from her communications director. FYI footage trending on Threads and X. Rough video quality, but the incident is clear. Crew ID partially visible. No public identification of you yet. Aaliyah exhaled through her nose. So it had begun. She did not panic. This was not new. What happened in public now lived forever in digital footprints. There was no more such thing as a private incident. Not when someone was always filming. Not when narrative traveled faster than facts. She replied in brief. Do not engage. Do not correct. Just monitor. Internal impact first. We stay silent until it matters. She put the phone away again. Let the noise come. She had lived through louder storms. Across the aisle, Marcus Wynn had switched seats so his daughter could sleep against the window. He nodded at Aaliyah in quiet solidarity. She returned the nod. Not a conversation, just a thread of connection, a shared understanding between people who had walked the same fire and stayed upright. Aaliyah unlatched her tray table and laid down her notepad. Not the journal. This was something else. Strategy. She began sketching lines. Not literal diagrams, emotional ones. How the story would ripple. How her silence would be misunderstood. How the airline would hesitate between protecting its reputation or owning its bias. She was ready for it. She had built an entire career on being 10 steps ahead of how people saw her. What she was not ready for, however, was the voice that came next. Soft, tentative, from behind her. Dr. Sinclair Aaliyah turned slightly. It was Isla. She had returned again, but not with a tray or question. This time, she held a phone. Her own. I'm sorry to bother you, Isla said, her voice careful. But someone from corporate just texted me. Aaliyah said nothing. Waiting. They asked if I could confirm that you were on the flight, and if you'd caused a disturbance. Her jaw tightened. There it was. That crackle. the old, familiar static that rose when power felt threatened. Not the kind that panicked, the kind that pretended to be protocol, that whispered doubts instead of asking questions. She looked at Ela. "Did you respond?" "No," Ela said quickly. "Not yet. I didn't want to say the wrong thing." Aaliyah nodded. "Good." She motioned for Isla to sit in the empty jump seat across from her. To her credit, Isla did. Her hands folded in her lap, her posture nervous but open. Aaliyah leaned forward slightly. "Do you know what happens next?" Isla shook her head. "They're going to ask you what I said, how I looked, whether I made you feel unsafe, whether I made demands." Isla's eyes widened. "You didn't do any of that." "I know," Aaliyah said, "but that's not the point. The point is whether you tell the truth or try to explain it away." Silence. Then Isla's voice, quiet but certain, "I'll tell the truth." Aaliyah studied her face. Not to intimidate, to believe her. After a long pause, she nodded again. "Thank you." Isla stood slowly and returned to the galley. Marvin DuPont stepped forward next. His face had changed since the flight began. The smooth confidence he carried at boarding was now wrinkled with awareness. He stopped beside her row. "Dr. Sinclair, would it be all right if I spoke to the rest of the cabin?" Aaliyah raised an eyebrow. "About what Marvin cleared his throat, about what happened earlier. Just to clarify the disruption was not your fault, that operations has reviewed everything, and to thank them for their patience." She tilted her head, considering. This was unusual, but not unwelcome, a gesture of accountability, however small. She gave a quiet nod. "Do it." Marvin turned to face the front. He picked up the cabin intercom and spoke with a calm, firm voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your continued patience during our delayed takeoff earlier. I want to acknowledge a situation that occurred during the boarding process. Our operations team has resolved the matter and confirmed that all passengers are in their correct seating." He paused. "We appreciate your patience and understanding, and we especially appreciate Dr. Sinclair's composure throughout the process." There was a moment of silence after he spoke. Not dramatic, just weighty. Then a few heads turned. Some looked toward Aaliyah. Others glanced down at their devices. No applause, but a quiet shift in air. Respect had entered the cabin. Not because it was demanded, but because it had earned its place. Aaliyah leaned back in her seat once more. The clouds outside were denser now, painting long shadows over the wing. Her phone vibrated again. This time, the message was different. From Clara. "Just watch the footage. It's worse than I thought. We're drafting an internal memo and preparing sensitivity review company-wide. Your move changed something." She read the message twice, then let the phone rest on her thigh. She hadn't meant to change anything. Not today. Today had started like any other travel day. Coffee. Carry on. Window seat. But that was the trick of systems. They made injustice feel normal. Until someone pressed pause, she had simply chosen to be the one who didn't keep going like nothing had happened. The seatbelt light flickered on. She buckled in. A slight jolt of turbulence brushed the side of the plane. It passed quickly. Aaliyah didn't flinch. She had known worse turbulence. She had flown through stronger storms, and she was still rising. The plane was steady now. Altitude had leveled. The clouds below looked soft and harmless. Flight 611 cruised smoothly at 34,000 feet. The cabin lights dimmed to a warm amber glow. And yet, beneath the surface, something was still shifting. "Doctor?" Aaliyah Sinclair sat quietly in 2A. hands folded on her lap, eyes on the seatback screen, though it wasn't playing anything. She wasn't watching the movie. She wasn't reading. She wasn't asleep. She was simply holding the moment. Across the aisle, Marcus Wynne was reading a paperback novel while his daughter slept against his shoulder. From time to time, he glanced toward Aaliyah, as if confirming that she was still there, still seated, still grounded, and she was. Marvin Dupont approached again, now with more ease than earlier. He stopped just beside her seat, his voice hushed but sure. "Dr. Sinclair, operations just confirmed you'll be greeted by executive staff upon landing in Chicago. There's also something else." He paused. Aaliyah looked up, waiting. Marvin shifted slightly and continued. "There's a memo going out, company-wide, from Clara's team, about today. They're citing it as an inflection point for internal policy." Aaliyah nodded slowly. She had expected that. The airline had always been cautious about image, but this was more than PR. This was about protocol, the kind of protocol that needed rewriting. "I understand," she said. Marvin lingered, visibly hesitant. "There's also word going around the crew." Aaliyah raised an eyebrow. About who you are, what you built, your position." He didn't say it like it was gossip. He said it like it was news, like a revelation had dawned over a community that had only seen her as a moment of conflict, and now saw her as the architect behind the systems they followed. Aaliyah didn't flinch. She had waited for this before. Not the recognition. That wasn't what mattered. What mattered was the shift in lens. What happened when people realized the person they overlooked had been in the room the whole time? "What are they saying?" she asked. Marvin scratched the back of his neck. "They're saying they're embarrassed, that they didn't see it sooner, that they reacted how they did. Some are wondering if they would have done anything differently had they known." Aaliyah looked out the window. Then she turned back. "That's the point, though, isn't it? That they didn't know, and still made a choice." Marvin nodded. Quiet agreement. "I'm sorry," he said again, softly. She gave a small nod in return. "Thank you." Then she returned to her seat, but not before Marvin added one final thought. "There's one other thing, ma'am. The cabin crew from the back. They'd like to meet you. Only if you're willing." Aaliyah hesitated, not because she didn't want to speak to them, because she knew what these moments meant. They weren't always about gratitude. Sometimes they were about guilt, and sometimes guilt dressed itself as curiosity. Still, she nodded. "Yes, they can come forward, but only 2 at a time." A few minutes later, 2 junior flight attendants stood at her row. Nervous. One looked barely 22. The other, slightly older, had a notepad in his hand. "Dr. Sinclair," the older one began, "I hope this isn't inappropriate, but we just wanted to say we're sorry for everything that happened. And," the younger one added, "we've read about you. We didn't realize you were the founder of JetLayer, that you helped design the training systems we use." Aaliyah let that sit in the air for a moment. She looked at both of them. "And does knowing that change how you see me?" They hesitated, then nodded. "In a way," said the older one. "Not because of the title, but because it reminded us how easily we make assumptions." Aaliyah leaned slightly forward. "What did you assume they didn't speak at first?" Then the younger one whispered, "That you were the problem, before we even knew anything." Aaliyah met her eyes, and this time her voice was softer. "I know, but the important thing is not just seeing that now. It's remembering it the next time you're in a position to choose who you believe. They both nodded, clearly moved. As they walked away, Aaliyah leaned back again. This was never about vengeance. It was always about reflection. Let them feel it. Let them carry it into the next flight, the next interaction, the next time someone like her boarded a plane with a quiet ticket and no one there to explain her credentials. A few minutes passed before Isla returned. She stood without words for a second. Then she said it. "I Googled you." Aaliyah didn't smile, but there was a glimmer of amusement in her eyes. "Did you learn anything useful?" Isla shifted. "Honestly, I felt ashamed. Not just because I didn't recognize you, but because, even if you weren't who you are, I still treated you like a threat for no reason." Aaliyah let the words settle, then responded, "You don't need to memorize who I am. Just remember this. Status doesn't always wear a badge. Respect doesn't need to be earned through recognition. Sometimes it just needs to be offered freely." Isla nodded, her shoulders a little looser than before. "Thank you for staying. For not walking off." "I thought about it," Aaliyah admitted. "Why didn't you?" She paused, then said simply, "There was a girl watching. I wanted her to remember what dignity looks like." Isla's eyes watered. Just a little. She nodded once more and stepped back. The cabin returned to silence, but it was no longer the uncomfortable silence from before. It was the kind of quiet that comes after clarity, a hush that holds the shape of transformation. Aaliyah rested her head against the seat, closed her eyes again. She wasn't tired. She was just full of what the day had meant, of what it had cost, and of what it might change. Her phone buzzed again. A short message from Clara. "Senior leadership is requesting a meeting next week. They want your input on rewriting policy. Full executive session." She responded, "Schedule it, but only after they talk to the flight crew. I want their voices in the room first." She slid the phone back into her bag. The truth was, her voice had always been in the room. Now it would echo, not because she shouted, but because people finally chose to listen. The hum of the cabin returned to normal. Drinks were being served. Snack carts rolled down the aisle. The seatbelt sign blinked off with a soft chime. But underneath the routine, something deeper was happening. People were talking, not loudly, not carelessly, but in low, careful tones. There were no confrontations, just murmurs between strangers who had become unexpected witnesses. It started with Marcus Wynn. He leaned slightly toward the passenger beside him, a woman who had been reading a business magazine through most of the flight. "You saw what happened earlier." "Right." She nodded without looking up. "Hard not to." He tilted his head toward Aaliyah, still seated in 2A, calm and focused as ever. "That woman over there, she handled herself like no one I've ever seen. I'd have lost it." The woman finally looked at him. "Same. Honestly, I'm still thinking about it." Marcus nodded. "My daughter was watching the whole thing. I didn't know what to say at first, but I told her something important." "What's that?" He smiled gently. "That courage doesn't always have to be loud. Sometimes it just needs to hold its ground." The woman looked over at Aaliyah. She was still, focused, present. She turned back to Marcus. "That's going to stay with her." "Your daughter?" "Yeah," Marcus said quietly. "It'll stay with both of us. Behind them." Two other passengers spoke softly as they scrolled their phones. "That's her." "Right, yeah. Dr. Aaliyah Sinclair. She co-founded JetLayer. No wonder she stayed so calm. She probably owns half the company. Still, She didn't pull rank, didn't name drop, just waited. Let the system trip over itself. She didn't need to say a word. Her presence said enough. Not everyone said something out loud, but nearly everyone was thinking something. The echo had begun. It moved beyond the row, beyond the seat, beyond the screen where someone had recorded just enough of the moment for it to go viral. Already the clip had gained traction online. A blurry video, a voice saying, "She doesn't belong here." Then silence. Then the cabin doors opening again. The world would fill in the gaps. But on this plane, the people who had been there would remember more than just the footage. They would remember how it felt. Aaliyah didn't know who was talking. She didn't need to. Her focus was on her notepad again. She wasn't writing, just thinking, watching the ink lines dry from earlier notes. Then a quiet voice appeared beside her. It was Marcus. He stood by her seat, holding a folded piece of paper. "I hope I'm not bothering you," he said softly. "Not at all," Aaliyah replied. He handed her the paper. "It's from my daughter. She wanted to give it to you, but was too shy. She fell asleep before she could." Aaliyah unfolded it gently. In crayon, a little drawing. 2 women, one tall, in a blazer, the other smaller, with curly hair and a backpack. Underneath the drawing, in big letters, "You are really brave. Thank you for showing me." Aaliyah's heart tightened, not from sadness, from recognition. She looked up. "Tell her I'm proud of her." She saw something most adults miss. Marcus smiled. "I will. And thank you. Not just for her. For me too." He returned to his seat. Aaliyah held the drawing for a few more seconds before folding it gently and placing it in the back of her journal. The echo had reached her. It wasn't applause. It wasn't vindication. It was legacy. A subtle inheritance passed between strangers, through dignity, up near the galley. Isla Brooks had stopped pretending to do inventory. She leaned against the metal counter, still holding her tablet, though she hadn't entered a single update in the last 15 minutes. Marvin walked by, glanced at her. "You all right?" She nodded slowly. "Just thinking." He stepped closer. "You want to talk about it?" She hesitated. Then she said, "I think I've always prided myself on being neutral, like treating everyone the same." Marvin waited. "But today made me realize, neutral can mean nothing. Neutral can be the silence that lets harm happen." Marvin gave a small nod. "I used to think policy kept us safe, but now I see it can keep us blind." They stood there in the quiet for a while, not as crew, but as people learning. Aaliyah didn't know the details of these conversations, but she didn't need to. She could feel the atmosphere changing, not dramatically, just enough for people to carry the story with them long after landing. She looked out the window again. The clouds were thinning. City lights began to glow beneath them as they descended toward Chicago. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our initial descent into O'Hare. Please make sure your seatbelts are fastened and tray tables are in their upright positions." People adjusted, shifted, prepared. But something remained still inside her. She turned to her journal and flipped to a fresh page. At the top, she wrote, "The weight of being visible after being unseen." She let the sentence breathe. Then she added, "Let it echo. Let it teach. Let it shift the next moment before it repeats." She closed the journal. 1 row behind her, a teenage boy nudged his mother. "Mom, that lady's all over my feed." "That's her." "Right." The mother glanced up and nodded. "Yeah, That's her. Is she famous? She is now? But that's not why people are listening. Then why she paused. Because she didn't ask for attention. She asked for fairness. And she didn't scream to get it. She just stayed standing until the world had no choice but to look. The plane continued its descent. Landing gear clicked into place. The cabin lights brightened slightly. And all at once, the world below came into view. But it was the sky inside the plane, the space between strangers, between truth and assumption, between silence and shift that had already begun to change. The wheels touched down with a muted thud. Flight 611 glided across the runway with practiced ease, slowing into a gentle rhythm before coasting toward the gate. Inside the cabin, seat belts clicked. People shifted. Bags were pulled from under seats. Overhead bins loomed in anticipation. But Aaliyah didn't move. She stayed still, hands resting gently on her knees, eyes fixed on the seat in front of her. Not because she was unready, but because the sound of landing had taken her back. Not to the moment earlier, but to one long before. She was 17, the year she won a regional science competition in Birmingham. Her project had focused on magnetic resonance and flight trajectory. She had built a model of a sustainable aircraft wing from recycled composites. Her teacher had driven her to the award ceremony, smiling with pride. But when she arrived at the reception hall, something shifted. The woman at the registration table looked at her, then at the name on the list. "You're A." "Sinclair, yes," Aaliyah replied, hopeful. The woman frowned slightly. "Oh, I assumed. You were someone else." Aaliyah had smiled politely. She had learned that trick by then. She took her badge and made her way to the banquet room. Inside, clusters of students gathered around tables, laughing in suits and polished shoes. Most were white. A few were not, but none looked like her. She found her table and sat down. Minutes passed, people passed, but no one spoke to her. One boy sitting across from her whispered to another, not quietly enough. "Maybe she's one of the volunteers." They laughed. Aaliyah stared at her nameplate. Winner, aerospace category. She remembered the moment her name was called. Applause echoed, but only from the stage. A few claps from her teacher. The rest of the room had stayed oddly quiet, as if it surprised them, as if the trophy should have gone to someone more obvious. She had walked across the stage and smiled for the photo. The announcer had asked where she was planning to go to college. She had replied confidently, MIT. The silence after that answer had been louder than anything else that night. It wasn't that they didn't believe her. It was that they couldn't imagine her. Back in her hotel room, she sat on the edge of the bed with the trophy in her lap. She wasn't sad. She wasn't angry. She was something else. Tired. Tired of being the surprise in rooms she had earned her way into. Tired of carrying both her achievements and other people's disbelief at the same time. Her mother had called that night, asked how it went. Aaliyah had paused, then said, "They didn't see me. Not really." Her mother had been quiet for a moment, then replied gently, "Then make it so the next girl like you is impossible to ignore." That night changed something, not just because of the silence, but because it was the first time Aaliyah realized she didn't just want to be successful. She wanted to build something bigger than herself, something that made room, something that told the next girl like her, "You are not the exception. You are the standard." The plane jerked slightly as it turned toward the gate. Aaliyah blinked, present again. She glanced down at her lap, where her hands had unconsciously folded into fists. She unclenched them slowly. She had carried that 17-year-old with her into every boardroom since. Every meeting, every airport terminal, every seat she sat in that others thought did not belong to her. Not out of bitterness, but as a reminder to never let the room rewrite the truth she already knew. Outside the window, the jet bridge extended slowly, aligning with the cabin door. Passengers were beginning to stand, retrieve bags, bump elbows. But still, she stayed seated. She was not rushing to exit. She never did. Part of her always lingered in these moments, not for effect, but for reflection. What had changed? Who had changed? And what stayed the same? She reached for her journal and flipped to the page with her earlier notes. The drawing from Marcus's daughter was still tucked inside, its edges soft now from being handled. She smiled. That child had seen her. No titles, no background, no Wikipedia summaries, just the moment and the dignity within it. Isla appeared by her side one final time. We're cleared to deplane. You'll be escorted to the terminal lounge. There's a small group from operations waiting to greet you. Aaliyah nodded. Any media? Not officially, but I saw a couple passengers recording again. Someone will post something. Eventually. Aaliyah didn't sigh, didn't react. She simply closed her journal and stood. She turned toward Marcus and his daughter as she passed. The girl was awake now, rubbing her eyes. Thank you, Aaliyah said quietly. The girl blinked. For what? For reminding me what kind of example matters. The girl grinned sleepily. You look like a superhero. Aaliyah smiled. Maybe. Or maybe just a woman with a seat and a reason to keep it. They exchanged a small wave, and then Aaliyah walked toward the front of the plane, toward the next moment. Her shoes clicked gently against the floor, but her presence made more noise than that, the kind that would echo long after the flight had landed. The room was quiet, not the kind of quiet that comes from absence, but the kind that signals something is about to begin. Doctor. Aaliyah Sinclair stood at the far end of a rectangular glass conference table, her posture composed, her eyes calm. Around her sat 6 members of senior leadership from Orion Air Systems, the parent company behind Jetlayer. Some she knew well, others only by name. Across from her sat Clara Esteban, operations director. She had flown to Chicago directly after the incident, bypassing meetings, media requests, and emails to be here in person. Next to Clara sat the head of customer experience, 2 legal advisors, and the director of flight crew operations. None of them spoke yet. Aaliyah broke the silence. You asked me here for input, she said, her voice even. But if you brought me here for optics, let's save everyone the time. Clara straightened slightly. No optics. We're here to listen. Really listen. Aaliyah gave a single nod. Then let's begin. She stepped forward, not with force but with certainty, and pulled a small black notebook from her leather tote. She flipped it open to a flagged page and laid it on the table. I'm not here to recount what happened. You've seen the footage. You've read the reports. What matters now is not what went wrong. It's how often this happens without anyone noticing. One of the legal advisors spoke. We have formal training for in-flight bias. Dr. Sinclair. It's part of onboarding for all cabin crew and required annually. Aaliyah didn't look at him. She looked at Clara. Is that true? Clara answered carefully. Yes, but it's standardized. Slides, tests, policy definitions, not lived scenarios. And who reviews the materials? The policy committee, the legal advisor replied again. It's a joint panel. Aaliyah met his gaze now. How many members of that panel are black women? Silence. He looked at Clara. Clara looked down at the table. None, she said quietly. Aaliyah closed the notebook. She let the silence breathe. Then she spoke again. Let me be clear. What happened to me is not unusual. What's unusual is that you're hearing about it, that a video surfaced, that someone knew my name. She stepped closer to the table. But there are thousands of passengers who have their dignity chipped away in small pieces. A flight attendant who makes them repeat their name. A gate agent who doesn't believe their seat is real. A rowmate who refuses to move a bag because they assume status doesn't belong to someone who looks like me. She paused. The system isn't broken. It was built this way. You're just now seeing the edges. The director of flight crew operations shifted uncomfortably. So what do you recommend? Aaliyah didn't hesitate. First, rewrite the training materials. And I don't mean adjust the language. I mean build it from scratch with lived experience in the room. Use real scenarios, not imagined ones. She looked at Clara again. You said this was an inflection point. Then treat it like one. Clara nodded slowly. We can do that. Second, Aaliyah continued, build in passenger feedback loops for bias-related incidents. Let people speak for themselves, not through complaint forms, through follow-up interviews, especially when removals or seating conflicts happen. The legal team exchanged glances. Aaliyah caught it. And yes, she said, that might increase liability. But protecting yourself from lawsuits at the expense of your passengers' humanity is not the business model you should want to defend. No one argued. She leaned forward slightly. Third, and this matters most, I want a full bias audit, not just a staff, of decision-making chains. How are seats reassigned? Who gets flagged for random checks? How are alerts handled by junior versus senior staff? She looked at Clara again. Start with Flight 611. Clara nodded again, more firmly this time. We will. Aaliyah's voice softened now. I don't want apologies. She let that sit in the room. I don't need statements or hashtags or promotional campaigns with photos of black flight attendants. She looked around the table. I want change. The woman from customer experience cleared her throat. We hear you, Dr. Sinclair, and we want to do better. Is there a role you'd be willing to play in shaping that change? Aaliyah thought for a moment. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. Inside was a single page, a proposal. She handed it to Clara. The title read, The Ground Truth Initiative, a structural redesign for human dignity in flight. Clara scanned the document. Her expression changed slowly as she read. Aaliyah explained, It's a long-term partnership model. I'm not here to be a spokesperson. I'm here to make sure this company becomes something better than what it was yesterday. The legal advisor shifted again. And if the media continues to amplify the incident, Aaliyah turned to him, then let it amplify something worth echoing. The meeting ended 40 minutes later, not with applause, not with fanfare, but with quiet commitments. As the room emptied, Clara remained. She looked at Aaliyah across the now empty table. You know, you could have sued. You still can. Aaliyah smiled. Just a little. I could have. But lawsuits fade. Systems echo. Clara took a breath. I'm sorry it took this long. Aaliyah picked up her bag. Just don't let it take longer. They left the building together. No press. No photos. Just a door swinging closed behind two women who had decided that change doesn't begin when you're hurt. It begins when you refuse to let it keep happening to others. The airport cafe was almost empty. tucked in a quiet corner of the terminal, far from the boarding gates and the business lounge chatter. It offered the one thing Aaliyah Sinclair needed more than anything else: stillness. No meetings, no security, no stairs, just a ceramic mug, a chipped wooden table, and a wide window overlooking the tarmac. She sipped slowly from a cup of herbal tea, letting the heat roll gently across her tongue. No sugar, no lemon, just warmth. It was the first moment in hours that did not require her to speak, instruct, or correct. She let her body exhale. Her shoulders, which had been square for too long, eased. Her hands, once tense, now rested palm down on the table. She watched the runway lights blink like distant thoughts. In the distance, a plane lifted off, cutting through the dusk, a quiet departure. Not all takeoffs had to be loud. Sometimes, the most important ones didn't even make a sound. She reached into her bag and took out her journal again. The little girl's drawing was still folded neatly inside. She opened it once more, held it gently in her fingers. It was just crayon on paper. But to her, it felt like gold. The simplicity of a child's recognition. The way it stripped away complexity and reduced it to what mattered. "You are really brave." The phrase sat with her. She didn't always feel brave, not in the way people imagined. Bravery unto her had never looked like shouting or demanding. It had looked like biting her tongue when she wanted to scream, like holding eye contact when someone tried to make her disappear, like staying seated when her whole body wanted to leave. She didn't wear armor. She wore memory and expectation, and resilience passed down from generations of women who endured far worse with far less space to breathe. Her phone vibrated on the table, a single message previewed across the screen. Isla Brooks. She hesitated, then opened it. "Hi, Dr. Sinclair. I hope this isn't overstepping. I know you're probably done with the day, but I just needed to say this. What happened today, how I reacted to you, what I didn't do, it's going to stay with me. I'm not reaching out to explain it, just to take responsibility for it. I've already asked to be reassigned to the internal bias task force Clara mentioned. I don't want to forget. I want to help fix it. Also, thank you. Not just for staying calm, but for not giving up on people like me. You didn't owe us that. Sincerely." Isla Alia stared at the screen for a long time, not because she didn't know what to say, but because she had not expected it. Real accountability was rare. She thought back to Isla's face on the plane, the moment when truth cracked through performance, when defensiveness dropped, and a real person stood in its place. She typed her reply. "Hi, Isla. Thank you for this message. It means more than you know. We all carry things we don't always see until someone else helps us notice. The work begins when we stop flinching from that truth. Keep doing the work. And remember, today wasn't about guilt. It was about growth. Be well. Up. Sinclair." She pressed send. The phone buzzed once, then fell silent. The airport cafe remained dim. The sky outside turned soft with evening blue. Another plane rolled slowly across the tarmac, lights glowing like quiet signals. Aaliyah turned back to her tea. This was the part of the journey no one ever saw. Not the conflict, not the meeting, not the viral moment, but the part afterward, where everything still echoes, where your body begins to process what your mind hasn't yet named, where you sit in a chair, in a corner, watching life resume, and ask yourself, did I do enough? Did I say what needed to be said? Was silence the right choice? She flipped through her journal again, found the page where she had written her line earlier. The weight of being visible after being unseen. She read it once. Then, just below it, added a second line. The power of being still when the world tries to move you. A soft smile curled at the edge of her lips. She remembered something her grandmother used to say. You don't have to win every room, baby. You just have to survive it and still be you when it's over. That's what today had been. Not a battle, a survival, and not the first, not the last, but one that would shift something. In Isla, in Clara, in Marcus, in his daughter, and maybe someday in the policy books that stopped being paperwork and started becoming protection. She checked the time. The next flight to D.C. would be boarding soon. She wasn't in a hurry. Not anymore. She folded the journal, finished her tea, slid her bag over her shoulder. At the counter, the barista glanced up and said, "Hey, I'm sorry to ask, but are you the woman from that flight?" "The one people are talking about." Aaliyah paused, then gave a small nod. The barista didn't ask for a photo, didn't gush, just said, "That was something. I hope they listened to you." Aaliyah met his gaze and smiled. "They will. Eventually." He nodded. "Thanks for holding your ground." She gave a quiet thank you and walked away. Her steps were unhurried. Her posture, upright, outside. The sky had dimmed fully. Planes blinked their way across the black canvas. Somewhere, another flight was about to take off. Another set of passengers ready to climb. And somewhere among them, someone else would be asked, subtly or not, "Do you belong here?" She hoped the answer would echo back from this day. "Yes, I do. And I am not moving for your comfort." She reached the gate and waited in line. No one questioned her this time. No glances, no whispered second guesses. Just a boarding pass, a beep, and a smile from the agent. She stepped down the jet bridge toward the next flight. But she carried more than her bag. She carried every echo that had begun hours ago in seat 2A. And now it was spreading, not through shouting, not through scandal, but through something far more powerful. The memory of someone who stayed seated until truth had no choice but to stand. The plane took off quietly. "Doctor?" Aaliyah Sinclair sat by the window again. A different flight, a different city, a different set of names on the manifest, but the same sky. It welcomed her without question, without baggage, without a glance at her skin, her surname, or her silence. Just pressure, lift, flight. She closed her eyes as the cabin tilted upward and felt her body lean back with it. The force against her chest, the pause in gravity, the breath held by every passenger at once as the world slipped beneath them. She did not fear this feeling. She had made peace with it long ago, because flying, for her, was not just movement, it was memory. And now it was proof that she could rise, again and again, in a world that had tried to keep her seated in silence. She turned her gaze to the window. The clouds stretched across the horizon like an invitation, cotton white against a canvas of fading gold. Cities below flickered like whispers, dim and distant. Somewhere down there, the story was still being shared, uploaded, debated, misunderstood, celebrated. But up here, there was only clarity. The flight attendants moved quietly through the cabin. No one stared at her this time. No one paused by her row with nervous smiles or cautious glances. Not because they didn't know, but because the knowing had changed something. One of them, a young woman with a warm voice, approached with a water bottle and a napkin. "Dr. Sinclair," she said softly, placing the items on the tray table. No charge. Aaliyah smiled. Thank you. The attendant lingered a second longer. I read the memo. The new initiative. Ground truth. It's exactly what we needed. Aaliyah nodded. You'll be part of shaping it. The attendant beamed, then moved on. The napkin had something written on it. 4 words. You gave us altitude. Aaliyah folded it gently and placed it inside her journal, next to the child's drawing. Another echo, another ripple, another reminder that the quiet moments mattered. She took out her pen, not to write a speech, not to record the day, but to note a promise. 1 line. What begins in silence must end in change. She paused, then underlined it once. This was not closure. This was continuity. She thought about Clara, about Isla, about Marvin, about the 2 junior flight attendants who stood in front of her, vulnerable, honest, and unprepared for what their silence had revealed. She thought about Marcus's daughter and her crayon letter, and about herself, not just now, but the girl in Birmingham, the one who stood on a stage with a trophy no one clapped for, the one who walked back to her seat holding more than a medal. She held the truth, that greatness would never come with an invitation. It had to be taken, quietly, firmly, without waiting for permission. And now, finally, she understood why it mattered so much to stay, not just to prove herself, but to make the path visible for whoever came next. She glanced at the screen above her. Flight time 1 hour, 42 minutes to Washington, D.C. Aaliyah had meetings ahead, interviews she might or might not accept, but none of that mattered right now. What mattered was this altitude, this seat, this moment of stillness earned. She pulled the window shade down slightly, letting just enough light peek through to color her lap in soft gold. She breathed deeply. She didn't need recognition. She didn't need revenge. She needed reform, and it had begun. She leaned her head back and closed her eyes again. This time, she allowed herself to rest, not because she was tired, because she had given everything that mattered. And now, she could let it fly on its own. Below her, the world kept moving. The story would continue. There would be copycats, critics, defenders, deniers. But the sky did not lie. It did not care what you wore, what you were worth, how quiet or loud you were. It only asked one question. Can you rise, an Aaliyah? She already had. Today's story reminds us that respect isn't a privilege reserved for the few. It's a basic human right that must be fiercely protected and shared freely. Dr. Aaliyah Sinclair's quiet courage shines a light on the everyday battles fought against discrimination and the power of standing firm with dignity. But this is more than just one woman's story. It's a call to all of us to recognize the silent biases we carry, to challenge injustice whenever we see it, and to uplift those who are too often overlooked. If this story moved you, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more stories that inspire change and deepen understanding. Stay with us for the next video, where we continue to explore stories that challenge perceptions and celebrate the strength in every human soul. Because together, we can build a world where everyone's seat is honored.